wandering through the other world, and exploring a set of apartments that resemble their real-life counterpart. Walter Sullivan, the game's quote-unquote antagonist and the engineer of this other world, can be found sitting at a set of stairs. He says something that at a first-time listen sounds normal. Hell, it might even sound normal on 100th listen, unless you are deep into the iceberg of comprehending this game. The meaning behind these words is the reason why I adore this game. The convoluted and messed up world of the game somehow manages to connect dots that shouldn't connect, and it does so intelligently yet so vaguely that some insane details are bound to be missed by, well, almost everyone. Now, I'm not like a Silent Hill 4 zealot, but I've played and researched the game for years, and I am astonished by how regularly I discover new details surrounding the world, its lore, metaphors, connections, and symbolisms. And Walter's dialogue at this part is the perfect case study. But in order to understand the present, the past needs to be examined. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this game's basic premise or need a refresher, I'll sum it up in like 30 seconds. The plot revolves around Walter Sullivan's story. Walter is an orphan that was abused as a kid by a cult that disguised themselves as an orphanage. The cult, aka the Order, would brainwash him into believing that the physical room where he was born in is his mother. Yes, Walter believes that the apartment room, the physical space between these four walls, is his mother. And to reunite with her, or it for that matter, he needs to perform the 21 Sacraments ritual. For the focus of this video, all you need to know about the 21 Sacraments is that it involves killing 21 people. And surely enough, Walter would grow up and start this ritual where he would murder the first 10 people, then offs himself as victim number 11. And finally, after his death, he would proceed to finish off the remaining 10 as a different entity, a ghost of some sorts who would lure his victims into his world. His world is on a different plane of existence. It's a world that manifests pieces of him, with each location resembling a certain event in his life and each object corresponding to a memory of some sorts. A world that he built and wanders in for the purpose of finishing the 21 Sacraments. The most ambiguous part of this quick history lesson is Walter taking his own life and then continuing his murder spree in a different form of existence. This action directly connects to the meaning of his previously mentioned dialogue. And while all of this may seem fairly vague at the moment, dots will start to connect after taking a deep dive into Walter's past. Going back in time to nearly 2 decades ago, where Walter was at his lowest. He was around 16 at the time, lying with his shabby sleeping bag in the cold tunnels of the South Ashfield subway station. He would encounter a variety of people that he'd make the most baneful interactions with, such as his humiliating encounter with Cynthia Velasquez, which I'll talk about later in the video. But amongst his usually cynical encounters, he would finally catch a break as the young Eileen Galvin would approach him. Eileen, who was around 5 at the time, was out for shopping with her mother, where they stumble on the not-so-good-looking Walter. Eileen's curiosity would make her question Walter's situation, asking him why would he sleep in such a cold place, showing sympathy for the broken man. Naturally, her mother would instruct her to keep away from the stranger and to stop talking to him. But Eileen shakes her mother's hand and approaches Walter with a gift, a brand new doll that she would lay beside him to cheer him up, telling him, quote-unquote, "You can sleep with her now," right before strolling away with her mom to catch her father's birthday. For Walter, this would be the first time in his life where anyone would gift him anything, the first time where someone would do something for him instead of making him do something for them. This act would leave him in tears as he is holding the gifted doll. Jumping on to the present timeline, where little Eileen is now a young lady, and Walter is still holding that same doll she gifted him. But now the doll has been worn out, shabby, and old. It only makes sense that, through the years, the doll would degrade and Eileen would get old. I mean, in the passing of nearly 2 decades, Eileen has grown up from a 5-year-old to now a 23-year-old. And Walter, who was around 16 years old at the time, is now in his early 20s, possibly even younger than Eileen herself. How's that possible? Walter himself insinuates this convolution by stating that Eileen was younger than him when she gifted him the doll. I mean, obviously, she was a little kid and he was in his mid to late teens, but his phrasing of this sentence implies that this is no longer the case, as if Eileen is no longer the younger one.
I got this from Miss Galvin a long time ago. She was younger than me back then.
Back then. But unless Walter has that Benjamin Button disease, how could he have become the younger one in the present? Well, by following the timeline of Walter's murder spree, it is known that after he butchered the first 10 victims, he got caught and was sent to prison, where he would take the life of victim number 11, himself. As part of completing the 21 Sacraments ritual, he needed to, quote-unquote, release himself from the bonds of the flesh. So he stabbed himself in the neck with a soup spoon, ending his life. Or that's at least what the police report says, but that's besides the point. What matters is he did end himself, and the ritual of liberation would create another version of him. A different entity that is unbounded by the physical limits of the mundane world. Of course, with one of these physical limits being age. You can't age if you're dead. So, Walter's second form is indefinitely stuck at a certain age. This age is determined by the moment he took his life. But how old was he when he did just that? Well, the superintendent's diary reveals that the incident of Walter's birth and abandonment was around 30 years ago. This means that if Walter was alive today, he would be in his early 30s, in theory. But he isn't. And when further inspecting the superintendent's second diary, it mentions an incident that took place 10 years ago where the superintendent witnessed a man with a long hair and coat, carrying a bag that was dripping blood. This man is Walter in his second form, his ghost form, if you will. And the bag he is carrying is his own corpse that he dug up earlier from his grave. He would place his corpse in a secret room that he would wall up in apartment 302. This 10-year-old event confirms Walter's death at the time, concluding that he was in his early 20s when he took his life and stopped physically aging in the ordinary world. Eileen is a 23-year-old now, a year or a couple of years older than him. Before moving on to the next case, I have to say that for all the well-deserved praise this game gets, it's not perfect and incoherencies are bound to occur. In this case, it particularly surrounds the inconsistencies of its timeline. While there is a vast amount of information to be learned from the various mediums in regards to the game's lore and universe, they don't always point to the same direction, which is why there is an equally vast amount of fan speculation and theories. And while I've did some heavy research on both ends, I'll be focusing on information I've discovered directly from the game itself, or referenced by an official source like another Crimson Tome, which is a set of backstories and information released by the developers themselves as canon. But even then, the game still runs on somewhat convoluted and sometimes conflicted timeline, which is why I've dedicated the final segment of the video to address some of these inconsistencies. Do they take away from the charm of the game? Well, sometimes, but I've always considered this particular encounter to be one of the most spine-chilling moments in the game. And by no means that's an easy feat considering the game has no shortage of unsettling themes. Part of it is because this is the first time where Walter's presence suggests something greater than a direct physical harm, but more of a vague mental exploration of the state of his mind. Which leads into the next case study, and it explores a detail that showcases the insane depths of Walter's depraved psyche. There is an audio clip that plays moments after picking up a newspaper outside of Garland's pet shop. The newspaper itself transcribes a cold-blooded murder that took place at the same spot where an armed citizen walked into the shop at 3:30 and brutally slaughtered the shop's owner, along with every living animal in there. The audio clip I've mentioned recites this incident to be overheard from the outside door. There is a small little detail here that manages to show a flaw that is far more disturbing than what the situation insinuates. And somehow, it's not the chilling sound of cats and dogs getting massacred, or even the extreme context of the subject matter. I mean, while it's true that the lack of visual presentation does add to how unsettling the event can feel, I would still be somewhat unmoved if we are solely going off how unhinged the incident is, because the game has no shortage of spine-chilling death scenes that I'd rank at the top of what the medium has to offer. But what is so exceptionally fascinating about this moment is the subtle implication it holds. The context here is that the perpetrator of the shootings is none other than Walter Sullivan, and the previously mentioned pet shop owner, Steve Garland, happened to be victim number 4 out of the 21. But why him? Did Walter just happen to pick him right out of the blue? Well, no. It's because 26 years prior, a young Walter walked in the pet shop and dropped the cage of an important animal. He presumably got scolded for it by the shop's same owner, and this act would save Garland a spot on Walter's hit list 26 years later. This is a reoccurring theme with most of Walter's victims, where most of them he had encountered early on, and usually these interactions wouldn't go in a favorable way for Walter, mostly due to the lack of his social awareness. A good example would be Cynthia Velasquez, who would he encounter as a teenager, where she would reject and humiliate him for his appearance and approach as a creep. Later on, bam, she's victim number 16. My point is that while all of these victims were picked dependent on a certain theme that would serve the ritual's demands, there is still definitely a human bias in his selection that derives from malice. But nonetheless, his choice in victims would always serve the purpose of fulfilling the ritual's script, regardless of his bias. For example, killing Cynthia would put a checkmark on the temptation verse. Killing Andrew DeSalvo puts a checkmark on the watchfulness verse. Killing Richard Braintree checkmarks the chaos verse, and so on. So in his mind, he thinks he is choosing these victims according to the ritual's prerequisites, but subconsciously, he's fulfilling a sick form of vengeance. Well, until the subconscious isn't subconscious anymore, as Walter breaks character, showing a flaw in his scheme, and the pet shop shootings is where that flaw transpires. You see, killing the shop's owner is supposed to put a checkmark on the blood of the 10 sinners verse, while killing every living animal in there puts a checkmark on, well, nothing but Walter's deranged psyche. The years of torture and mental abuse can't seem but to rear its ugly head and manifest in his actions, while his vengeful and hate-filled motives can be argued for most of the other victims. He can play it off in his mind as him just being devoted to the ritual, since their murder serves that exact purpose. Unlike the animals, whom murder is the product of a 26-year-old grudge he held from being scolded by the owner for dropping the cage and injuring this important pet all these years ago. I love this moment because it shows a human side to Walter's otherwise paranormal and uncanny presence. A depraved and a petty side, but a human one nonetheless. Unlike the next case, which demonstrates the opposite of a human side and delves into something more corrupt.
I'm really thirsty. I'm so thirsty. I want some chocolate milk.
Jasper is a mentally unbalanced man with a speech impediment. His stutter resembles his insecure persona in some ways, Aesthetically, he's rocking a little bit of that punk look that matches his love for the abnormal. This fascination with the occult would draw him to investigate the Silent Hill cult, where he and a couple of his buddies would go on an expedition to find quote-unquote the devil. Jasper's fearful hesitation would save him from delving deeper into this mission, but the same cannot be said for his friends, as they would both end up mysteriously dead. On a side note, I love the fact that in the previously mentioned Another Crimson Tome, it says that on the night of the expedition, Jasper heard an echoing voice in the distance saying, quote-unquote, "Hey, still hiding there? Come on up, buddy. You came here to see me, Jasper." But now, 10 years had gone by, and fortunately for him, he would finally get the chance to scratch that itch and find out what he was missing out on. And if he's lucky enough, maybe he will meet the devil this time. Jasper can be encountered sitting next to a rock near the Silent Hill orphanage. It's unclear how he ended up in Walter's world, but what matters is that he knows something's big about to happen. And being the freak he is, he's fairly excited about it. I like to think that his enthusiasm towards such a grim situation is in some ways a sigh of relief that validates the paranormality of his encounter from a decade ago. Anyways, after getting access to the orphanage while being accompanied by Jasper, a subtle doorknob sound can be heard as soon as the 21 Sacraments memo is picked up. The opening door in question is Jasper's entryway to hell.
I finally met him! The one the nosy guy talked about! The devil!
His stutter is almost non-existent anymore, symbolizing an overcoming of his fear and hesitance. There are a few theories that revolve around the reason of Jasper's theme being quote-unquote the source. Some might interpret it as Jasper being the source of information, but I would say that role goes to another character that is labeled as the giver of wisdom. Others claim that Jasper is the source of power that burns down the orphanage, as in the source of fire. But my theory, which is a little bit out there, connects Jasper to a character named Alyssa from Silent Hill 1, who was literally used as the source for the cult's ritual in that game. Okay, now bear with me on this one. Inside Walter's world, specifically in the orphanage where Jasper just died, there is a scribbled note left by a woman called Dahlia. Dahlia is the cult leader of Silent Hill 1, and she's heavily responsible for brainwashing Walter into thinking that the room he was born in is his actual mother, and the 21 Sacraments ritual is supposed to bring her back, or it back for that matter. In any case, Dahlia's scribbled note asks, "Have you found Alyssa yet? How is Walter's progress coming along?" So she's first asking, have you found Alyssa yet? Now Alyssa, as I've mentioned before, was the source of the cult's ritual, and who was trapped in an endless nightmare, just like Jasper, until her body was possessed by the incubus, who was literally on Jasper's shirt. I guess he did meet the devil after all. Now Dahlia's second question on the note asks, how is Walter's progress coming along? Well, Walter's progress seems to be going great since he is about to add victim number 17 to his list, who also happens to be Jasper, aka the Source. So there is definitely a vague connection between Jasper and Alyssa that registers them both as the Source. And what's crazy is that Silent Hill 1's main story revolves around a soul that was separated in half, and the cult is trying to reunite both of the soul parts back together in order to birth the incubus. Now these two parts of the same soul are in two different bodies. One is in Alyssa, who is a 14-year-old, and the other is in Cheryl, who is a 7-year-old. Combining the two parts for birthing the incubus would give the mathematical number of 21, directly correlating to the 21 Sacraments. Now at this point it could all just be Walmart numerology, but these references feel too deliberate to be brushed off as entirely coincidental. Sharon Blake is the only member of the Blake family who outrightly refused to join the cult of Silent Hill. It's unclear if the rest had joined the order willingly, or if, as Sharon thinks, they were abducted. Either ways, she knew that the Silent Hill Church was a fraud. I mean, the entire concept of rebirthing a god that will usher in an age of eternal paradise sounds a bit too good to be true. The game, however, supports this bright conclusion by members of the cult, leaving Sharon to be one of the few who reject these claims, placing her at number 13 for the set of Walter's victims. Of course, her murder would be appropriately themed as quote-unquote darkness, as she couldn't see the light of the cult's beliefs of salvation. But in a merely anticipated New World Order lies a tome that was written by an enemy of the cult, and it states an expose on how the ritual of the 21 sacraments is the ritual of the 21 heresies in reality, and that the descent of the Holy Mother is nothing but the descent of the devil. Which is why I was always enamored by the 21 sacraments ending, the game's quote-unquote worst one. Because to Walter, it should act as a way to reunite him with his mother, Room 302. To the Order, it should rebirth their god who is through the apocalypse will bring an eternal paradise. A god that suspiciously likes to feed on the suffering of humanity, making the scripts of the Crimson Tome highly credible in describing this god as nothing but the devil in reality. The ending itself vaguely incorporates these extreme concepts with an outcome that would significantly affect the game's universe post-credits. The final revelation insinuates an impending course of action that is pretty sinister to say the least. You see, reaching the end goal of reuniting Walter with his quote-unquote mother would appease to the child in Walter, the innocent kid who just wants to be with his mom, and he gets just that. But the battered and bittered adult Walter had been broken by the system. He had seen and gone through enough things that the simple pleasure of a reunion is just not cutting it anymore. It's just a playground dream that he granted to the kid in front of him. By this point, it's unclear whether if Walter is acting out of his own self-interest purely, or if he is being subconsciously influenced by another entity within him, identified as Valtiel, the angel of rebirth who was instilled in him by the cult at a young age. But what is clear is that the job is far from done. If anything, it's only getting started, as indicated by the ending's radio broadcast.
Once again, we've got late-breaking news. 5 unnamed police officers have been found dead for reasons unknown in the South Ashfield Heights apartments, along with its superintendent, Mr. Frank Sunderland. All other residents of South Ashfield Heights have been rushed to St. Jerome's Hospital, many complaining of severe chest pain. These strange incidents are similar to the ones which occurred in Silent Hill some years ago. More news to follow.
This menacing scene never fails to give me goosebumps. This ending is well known to be a fan favorite and even the developer's favorite for varying reasons, with some are happy to just let bro have it. After all he went through, and others for the implications it hold, and while from a canonical standpoint this ending is probably the least favorable, for me it's the most realistic. Of course not in the literal meaning of the word, but in the sense of the story's own rules, key points, and the game's universe, where everything is paced to build up for this exact moment. Sure, the game structures some events that would build up to the other good endings, but to me they feel more like a cheap twist rather than an intricate course of action. I mean, you telling me you're stopping the rebirth of the devil/god or whatever by lighting up some candles in a room and making sure this bitch doesn't get smacked around too much. Like, bruh, get out of here with this anticlimactic ass shit. The superintendent's diary mentions the events of Walter's birth and abandonment and places their time period to have taken place 30 years ago. What's unclear is, when did the superintendent wrote this diary? After all, Henry's only coding its content, but the content itself could have been written anywhere from a few days to a few years ago. The game doesn't proclaim an official date or hint at a specific time period. The problem is that this conflict persists in every date possible. For example, take a look at the previously mentioned homicide of Steve Garland. It says that 26 years ago, a kid walked into Garland's store and got scolded for dropping a cage of an important animal. This kid is insinuated to be Walter. And of course it is Walter, otherwise there would be no purpose of even mentioning this act. Furthermore, it goes in tandem with every aspect of Walter's character building and backstory. So with that being established, how was Walter able to come back 26 years later for vengeance when he supposedly died at 24? Garland was one of the 10 victims Walter had murdered before taking his own life at supposedly 24. And 24 is according to fan speculation, and that number is a bit generous because according to my calculations, he was even younger when he died. Also keep in mind that the story mentions he was a kid 26 years ago, not born 26 years ago, but a kid. So that makes him even older when he came back for blood, 30 plus probably. The math is not adding up unless I'm missing something, which I could be since this game's lore is a giant spiderweb of complex connections and intertwined information. Some of the game's most basic and primary information about the world were implemented in a way that goes in tandem with serving a symbolic aspect of a situation. An example in Silent Hill 4 would be the first victim, Jimmy Stone, who is known as the Red Devil. He was given that nickname because his descendants served the Valtiel sect of the Order and carried out executions while wearing triangular red hoods. But in Silent Hill 2, the Red Devil refers to Pyramid Head, a different executioner that symbolizes punishment for James' deeds. And to go deeper, are any of these devils linked to what Jasper had encountered, or was the concept for this entity entirely different, operating on a contrary realm of existence? Personally, I would suggest the latter. But the point is that almost everything you look at in this game have a reason to exist and adds to its world building. And if you look hard enough, you will find this reason. But these answers do not come on a plate to solve their respective mysteries. If anything, they hand out a conclusion that opens the door for other questions. The thousands of hours online from Nob Zombie's story playthroughs can give a deep insight into the game's world. But you'll be surprised by how much you can unravel by booting up the game yourself and wander through its world. But until then, I suggest you check out the video for the game's closing soundtrack by Joe Romersa and see if you can decipher the lore of that shit.